The grand hall of Corvath Keep had not been silent like this in 300 years. Maris kept her shoulders pressed flat against the cold stone of the servants' alcove, holding her breath, holding her shaking hands together so tightly that her knuckles ached. Beyond the iron lattice that hid her from view, the great chamber stretched out in candlelit gloom, its high vaulted ceiling lost in shadow, its long tables bare of feasts. Tonight there was no music, no laughter. Only the soft sound of weeping from the dais and the low, broken breathing of a child who was dying. She should not have come. The head housekeeper had given her clear instructions when the order came down from the royal physicians. All servants were to remain in the lower wings during the prince's final hours. The Alpha King had commanded it. He wanted no witnesses to his grief. He wanted no eyes upon his son. But Maris had crept up the back stair anyway, pressing herself into the alcove behind the lattice, because something inside her chest would not let her stay below. Something that had begun the moment she first heard the boy's name spoken in the kitchens, 3 years ago, when she had arrived at the keep as a frightened girl of 19 with nowhere else to go. Prince Kalinor, the only child of the Alpha King. The hope of every wolf in the northern reach. The boy who was dying tonight, 6 years old, in his father's arms. Maris pressed her fist to her mouth to keep from making a sound. On the dais, the Alpha King knelt on the stone floor with his son cradled against his chest. He had taken off his crown. He had taken off the heavy fur mantle of his office. He wore only a plain linen shirt, dark with sweat and tears, and his black hair fell loose around his face like a curtain hiding him from the world. She had seen King Vale only 3 times in 3 years. Once across a crowded courtyard during the harvest blessing. Once at a distance during the winter procession. And once, by accident, when she had carried a basket of linens through the wrong corridor and nearly walked straight into him. He had looked at her then, only for a heartbeat. Amber eyes the color of dark honey, sharp and unreadable, sweeping over her face the way a wolf reads a stranger in the woods. Then he had stepped past her without a word, and she had stood frozen in the corridor for several minutes afterward, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. He looked nothing like a king now. He looked like a father whose world was ending. "Please," he whispered into his son's hair, and the word carried so much raw grief that Maris felt it pierce her ribs like an arrow. "Please, little wolf, stay with me, Kalinor." The boy's breathing rattled, thin and wet and stuttering, the breathing of a child whose lungs had begun to fail. For 3 months, Prince Kalinor had been wasting away. The court physicians had tried every art they knew. The pack healers had dosed him with every tonic they had. Wise women had been brought from the mountain villages, from the river valleys, from the eastern coast. A blind seer had been carried to his bedside on a litter from the southern shrines. None of them had been able to name the sickness. None of them had been able to slow it. The boy who had once climbed apple trees in the orchards now weighed less than a sack of flour and could not lift his own head. And Maris, who scrubbed pots in the lower kitchens and carried laundry up the back stairs, knew what was killing him. She had known for weeks. She had known the moment she had glimpsed him, by chance, being carried down the long gallery in his nurse's arms. She had seen the shadow lying across his small chest like a hand. She had felt the wrongness of it pulling at the air around him, the way a thread of black silk pulls a needle. She had recognized it because her grandmother had taught her to recognize it, long ago, in a cottage at the edge of a forest that no longer existed. It was not a sickness of the body. It was something else. Something older. Something that fed on the spark inside a wolf child, the way a moth feeds on a candle flame. And Maris, alone in this whole keep of warriors and physicians and trained healers, knew how to draw it out. But she could not. She must not. To use that gift was to die. Her grandmother had told her, in the last winter of her life, What would happen if Maris ever let the old craft show itself in the lands of the Wolf Kings? The pack laws were absolute. Magic in the blood of common-born women was unholy. It was hunted. It was driven out at the root. Her grandmother had whispered the names of 3 women they had both known, women who had let a single act of kindness reveal the gift inside them, and who had been dragged from their homes and never seen again. "Promise me," her grandmother had rasped, gripping Maris's wrist with fingers like dry twigs. "Promise me, Maris, child of my child. Bury it. Never let it breathe. Live a small life. Live a long life. Promise me." Maris had promised. For 7 years she had kept that promise. She watched now as the Alpha King pressed his forehead against his son's. She watched his shoulders begin to shake with silent sobs. She watched the head physician approach the dais with his head bowed and lean down, and murmur something that made the king flinch as though he had been struck. The boy had only hours, perhaps less. Maris closed her eyes. She thought of her grandmother. She thought of the small life she had been promised. She thought of the dim, warm kitchens below, and the bed of straw where she slept, and the simple safety of being no one and nothing in the eyes of the great. A life of obscurity, a life of breath. Then she opened her eyes again and she looked at the dying child, and she looked at the broken father, and she understood, with a quiet, terrible certainty, that her promise was already gone. She could not stand here behind a lattice and watch a child die when her hands could save him. She could not. Maris stepped out of the alcove. The guards at the lower edge of the dais saw her at once. 2 of them moved to intercept, hands going to the hilts of their long knives, eyes flashing the gold of the warning shift. Maris did not stop. She did not run, either. She simply walked toward the dais, her bare feet silent on the cold flagstones, her plain gray servant's dress stained at the hem with kitchen ash. "Halt!" one of the guards growled, low and dangerous. "Halt, girl, or you will be stopped where you stand." Maris halted. She had to. The guard's hand was on his blade, but her voice, when it came, did not shake. "Your Majesty," she said, loud enough to carry across the silent hall. "I can save him." The Alpha King did not look up. The head physician did. His face went white with fury. "Who let this creature in here? Remove her at once. Remove her, do you hear me? This is a place of sorrow, not a peasant's pageant." "I can save him," Maris repeated. Her heart was beating so hard she thought it might break her ribs. "Your Majesty, please, look at me. I know what is killing your son. I have seen it before. I can draw it out, but only if you let me try. Only tonight, before the last hour." The head physician was already striding toward her, his face twisted with disgust. The guards were closing the gap. In another heartbeat, she would be seized and dragged away, and the boy would die, and she would carry that loss inside her until her own. She drew breath to speak again, and then she did not need to. The Alpha King had raised his head. His amber eyes found her across the long hall. They were red-rimmed, swollen, ringed by sleeplessness, and yet underneath the grief Maris saw something that startled her. A flicker of recognition. The same sharp, unreadable assessment he had given her once before in a corridor of linens, when she had been no one and he had been a king. "Stop," he said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The head physician froze with one foot still raised. The guards halted in mid-stride. The whole great hall of Corvath Keep stilled around the single rough word of its king. The Alpha King looked at Maris for a long, terrible moment. Then he said, "Come." Maris walked toward the dais on legs that did not feel like her own. The head physician had begun to protest the moment the king spoke, his voice rising in outrage, his thin hands fluttering. "Your Majesty, this is madness. She is a kitchen girl, and she has no training, no lineage, and no place in this chamber. With respect, In the prince's final hours, we must not allow common superstition to defile the physician Orin. The Alpha King did not raise his voice. He did not even turn his head. If you say one more word, I will have you silenced. The hall went silent again. Maris reached the foot of the dais. The two guards stepped back from her, but she felt their eyes on her shoulder blades, 2 points of cold attention. She lifted the hem of her ash-stained dress and climbed the 3 low steps. This close, the Alpha King was larger than she had remembered. Even kneeling, he was broad through the shoulders, thick-armed, banded with the dense muscle of a wolf in his prime. His black hair was streaked with dust. His linen shirt was open at the throat, and she could see the great silver scar of the old king-making ritual carved across his collarbone. In his arms, the boy was so small, Kalinor, 6 years old, pale as wax. His dark hair was matted to his temples with sweat. His lips were blue. His eyelashes lay in 2 soft fans against cheeks that had once been round and were now hollowed almost to the bone. His tiny chest rose and fell in shallow flutters. Maris knelt on the stone beside the king. She did not touch the child yet. "Your Majesty," she said softly. "May I?" His amber eyes searched her face. Up close they were even more striking, threaded with gold and shadow, the eyes of a man who had not slept in 100 nights. He did not speak. He only nodded once, a short, broken motion, and shifted his hold on the boy so that Kalinor's small body lay open to her. Maris placed her right hand, very lightly, on the boy's chest. She placed her left hand, very lightly, on the boy's brow. She closed her eyes. The first thing she felt was the cold. It was not the cold of fever. It was the cold of something that should not be there. A coiled, watchful presence wrapped around the boy's heart and lungs like a length of black rope. It noticed her at once. It tightened its grip, and Kalinor made a thin sound of distress in his sleep, and the Alpha King let out a low, warning growl that vibrated through the floorboards. "It feels her," Maris whispered, more to herself than to the king. "Hold still. Please, hold still. Whatever happens, do not pull him away from me." "Whatever happens," the king repeated, hoarse. "Yes." She bent her head over the dying child, and she let the gift she had buried for 7 years come up out of her chest like a long-held breath. It hurt. It hurt the way a frozen limb hurts when warmth returns to it. Her grandmother had warned her of that too. Magic that has been stoppered for years does not flow gently when it is finally let out. It tears. It floods. Maris gasped aloud at the pain of it, and behind her closed eyes she saw her own hands begin to glow, a slow, steady, silver-blue light that she had not seen since she was 12 years old in a forest cottage, with her grandmother teaching her to coax fevers out of newborn lambs. The light passed from her palms into the boy. The cold thing inside Kalinor recoiled. It hissed. It thrashed. Maris felt it strike at her, a thin black tendril whipping up through the boy's heart toward her own, and she clenched her jaw and held her ground. She was not a great healer. She had never been trained in temples. She knew only what one old woman in one small cottage had taught one frightened child, and yet she knew this. She knew this. She knew how to call the shadow out. "Kalinor," she whispered. "Little wolf, come back." The boy's body arched. The Alpha King made a sound she would never forget, a wordless sound of fear from the throat of a king who had not been afraid in 20 years. "Hold him," Maris gasped. "Hold him steady. It is leaving. It does not want to leave." The black thing tore free of Kalinor's chest with a wet, sucking pull that Maris felt in her own ribs. It writhed in the air for one impossible moment, a thin, oily stain visible only to her, and then it dissolved into the candlelight and was gone. The boy went limp in his father's arms. For a heartbeat, Maris was certain she had failed him. Then Kalinor drew a deep, shuddering breath. the first full breath he had drawn in 3 months. He opened his eyes. They were the same amber as his father's, clear and confused and startlingly alive, and they fixed on Maris's face with the unfocused wonder of a child waking from a long dream. "Are you an angel?" he whispered. Maris laughed. It came out of her as a sob. "No, little wolf," she said. "I am only a servant." Behind her, the Alpha King made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a howl. His arms tightened around his son. His great bowed head pressed into the curve of the boy's neck. And Maris, looking down at her own hands, watched the silver-blue light fade out of her palms and leave her shaking and cold and utterly emptied. She had broken her promise. She had broken it in front of the king and the guards, and the head physician and a dozen lesser nobles still scattered along the edges of the hall. She had revealed, in one helpless moment, the gift her grandmother had begged her to bury. She bowed her head and waited for the soldiers to take her, but no hand closed on her shoulder. No blade came to her throat. After a long moment, Maris risked a glance up, and she found the Alpha King staring at her over the top of his son's head with an expression she could not read at all. Not gratitude, not anger. Something far stranger. Something that looked almost like fear. "What is your name?" he said. "Maris, your majesty." "Maris what?" "Just Maris, your majesty. I have no house." His amber eyes did not leave her face. "You have one now," he said quietly. 3 weeks passed. Maris was given a small, clean room 2 floors above the kitchens, with a real bed, and a single narrow window that looked out across the eastern orchards. She was given 3 plain dresses of dark green wool, embroidered at the cuffs with a single thread of silver. She was given a writ, sealed in dark wax with the king's own ring, declaring her to be the personal attendant of the prince and answerable to no one in the household but the Alpha King himself. The head physician, Orin, she did not see again. There were quiet rumors in the corridors that he had been sent to a posting in the far north and had not yet arrived. Kaliner recovered with the uncanny speed of wolf blood. By the end of the first week, he was sitting up. By the end of the second, he was walking. By the end of the third, he was running in short, bright bursts through the orchards with Maris hurrying after him. He had decided, on the morning after she saved him, that she was his. "You belong to me now," he had announced, very seriously, sitting up in his great carved bed with a cup of broth in his hands. "Father said. He said you belong to me and no one else gets to take you away. So, you are mine." "Yes, my prince," Maris had said, smiling. "Not my prince, Kaliner. I cannot call you that. You can. I am ordering you. You saved me, so you have to do what I say." She had laughed, and he had laughed with her, and somewhere deep in her chest a soft, frightened bird that had not sung in 7 years had begun to sing. The Alpha King came each evening. He never stayed long. He would step into the boys' chamber after the supper hour, in his dark plain coat without his crown, and he would sit on the edge of the bed and let Kaliner climb into his lap and tell him every small triumph of the day. Maris would stand at the window with her hands folded and her eyes lowered, the way servants were trained to stand, and she would listen to the Alpha King laugh quietly at his son's stories. Each night the laughs came a little easier. Each night the lines around his eyes softened a little more. He never spoke to Maris directly during these visits, but each night, on his way out of the chamber, he would pause at the door, and he would turn his head, and his amber eyes would find hers across the room, and he would incline his head to her in a small, silent nod. And each night, Maris's heart would do something strange and unhelpful inside her chest. She told herself it was nothing. He was the king. She was a kitchen girl who had stumbled into a miracle. The kindness in his nod was the kindness of a father, no more, given to the woman who had brought his son back from the dark. To imagine anything else was to be the worst kind of fool. But on the 8th night, the Alpha King did not leave at the door. Challoner was already asleep, curled small against his pillows, one hand still clutching the edge of his father's sleeve. The king carefully unwound the boy's fingers, tucked the blanket high under his chin, and bent to kiss his hair. Then he straightened and turned, and crossed the room toward Maris at the window. She dropped her gaze at once. "Look at me, Maris." She lifted her eyes. His face this close was not the face of the king-making portraits in the great hall. Those were the face of a sovereign. This was the face of a man. Tired. Unguarded. Younger than she had thought. Perhaps 32. Perhaps 33. There was a fresh small mark high on his cheekbone where he had been training that morning, and a faint smell of pine and snow on the wool of his coat. "You saved my son," he said. "Yes, Your Majesty. There is no payment in the world that matches that." Maris swallowed. "I did not do it for payment." "I know." His amber eyes searched her face. "That is what unsettles me." She did not know what to say to that. He stood there for a long moment, looking at her, and Maris felt the air in the room change in a way she had no name for. Then the Alpha King exhaled, slowly, and stepped back. He inclined his head to her again, the small, silent nod, and he was gone. That night, Maris could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed 2 floors above the kitchens with her hand pressed flat against the place between her collarbones where her grandmother had once told her the gift lived. It pulsed there now, faintly, the way a banked coal pulses under ash. And under it, deeper, somewhere she did not want to look, her heart pulsed with it. She told herself, again, that she was the worst kind of fool. She did not yet know that she had been seen. She did not know that at the far end of the same long corridor where her little room stood, a woman in a hooded blue cloak had paused that very evening at the kitchen mistress's door. She did not know that the woman had pressed 3 gold coins into the kitchen mistress's palm. She did not know that the woman had asked, very softly, who the strange new attendant of the prince might be, and where she had come from, and what exactly she had done in the great hall on the night the boy was meant to die. She did not know that the kitchen mistress had answered every question. She did not know that, across the kingdom in a cold high tower of black stone, an old man with eyes the color of river ice had received a folded letter and read it twice and let out a single soft breath through his teeth. She did not know that the letter, in its careful hand, contained only 7 words. "The hill woman has been found, my lord." The autumn deepened. The orchards of Corvath Keep began to drop their fruit, and the air sharpened with the smell of cold rivers and wood smoke. Challoner grew stronger by the day, until the only sign that he had ever been ill was the way he sometimes stopped in the middle of a game and turned to make sure Maris was still there. He had a habit now of slipping his small hand into hers without warning. He had a habit of falling asleep with his cheek against her shoulder. He had a habit of calling her, when he was very tired, by a word that made her chest ache. May. She knew she should correct him. She did not. The Alpha King, who was named Vale in the old tongue but whom the kingdom called only its king, came each evening as he had come before. The visits grew longer. He began to ask Maris almost shyly about the small details of the boy's day. Whether he had eaten, whether he had laughed, whether he had spoken of his late mother, who had passed in the boy's 3rd year and whom Vale had never spoken of in Maris's hearing. On the night of the first hard frost, Vale sat by the fire in Challoner's chamber and watched his son sleep, and he said quietly, without looking at her, "I almost lost him, Maris." "I know, Your Majesty." I had begun to plan his rites. I had chosen the songs. She did not know what to say. 3 months I sat by that bed, he said. 3 months, and every healer in 3 kingdoms passed through this keep. None of them. Not one of them. And then a kitchen girl walked out of an alcove and put her hand on his chest and gave him back to me. He turned his head and looked at her. Tell me how. Maris hesitated. Her grandmother's voice was very loud in her memory tonight. Bury it. Never let it breathe. But the king had already seen. My grandmother, she said softly, was a woman of the old hill country. Before the wolf kings came down from the north and the high pack laws were written, the women of her line were called the still hands. They drew sicknesses out of children. They eased dying. They could not raise the dead, and they could not heal a wound of the body, only a sickness of the spirit. After the laws came, most of them were lost. My grandmother was the last who remembered. She taught me. She told me never to use it, and I never did. Until I saw your son. Vale was quiet for a long time. The high pack laws, he said at last, were written by men who feared what they did not understand. They are still the law, Your Majesty. I am the law. He said it without arrogance, almost wearily, as though the weight of being the law had grown heavier than he wanted to carry tonight. He stood up from the fire and crossed the room to where she stood by the window, and he stopped a careful pace away from her, as though he did not entirely trust himself to come closer. Maris, he said. Yes, Your Majesty. Do not call me that. Not in this room. Not when it is only the three of us. He breathed out. My name is Vael. Your Majesty, I cannot. You can. A faint, tired smile. You saved my son. You can do whatever you like. She lowered her eyes because if she did not, she was going to cry. And a kitchen girl 2 floors above the kitchens did not cry in front of an alpha king. He lifted his hand. He did not touch her. He let his fingers hover, for a moment, near her temple, near the loose strand of dark hair that had come down from her braid. Then he closed his hand into a fist and let it fall to his side. Good night, Maris, he said. Good night, she whispered. She did not say his name. She did not yet trust herself to. The next morning, the carriage came up the long road from the south. Maris saw it from Calinor's window, where she was helping the boy pull on his small leather riding boots. A single dark carriage with the curtains drawn. 6 outriders in deep blue cloaks. No standard. No herald. Just the slow, heavy crunch of wheels on the gravel of the inner courtyard. Who is that, May? Calinor said. I do not know, little wolf. She did not know. But the gift in her chest had begun, very softly, to hum. It hummed the way a cat hums before a storm. It hummed the way her grandmother's hands had hummed the day the riders had come for the woman in the next village, the woman who had healed a child and been seen. Maris found that her own hands had gone cold. She finished tying the boy's bootlaces with fingers that wanted to shake. A knock came at the chamber door. The young page boy, breathless. Mistress Maris, the king requests your presence. In the council room. At once. Calinor looked up at her with sudden alarm. Are you in trouble? No, little wolf. She made her voice gentle. Of course not. I will be back before the bell. She went. The council room of Corvath Keep was a long stone chamber on the 2nd floor of the western wing, hung with old banners and lit by tall, narrow windows. Maris had been inside it only once before, to scrub the floor after a feast. Now the floor was clean, and the long oak table was polished, and at the head of it sat the Alpha King in his dark coat, his amber eyes flat and unreadable. Beside him stood the captain of his guard, a gray-bearded warrior named Halric, whose face was carved from disapproval. And opposite them, hooded and seated and folding her gloved hands very neatly upon the table, was a woman Maris had never seen before. The hood came back. Underneath was a face of arresting frozen beauty. A woman perhaps 40, with hair the color of pale wheat coiled into a tight crown, and eyes the color of river ice. Her cheekbones were high and sharp. Her mouth was small and amused. She looked at Maris without surprise, and Maris understood in a slow, cold rush that this woman had known exactly what she would look like long before she came through the door. Lady Saren of House Ostrenmark. Halric said grimly, sister of Lord Draven Ostrenmark, envoy of the Stone Council. The Stone Council, Maris repeated faintly. She had heard the name only in fragments of kitchen gossip. The Stone Council was the body of the 4 oldest noble houses of the realm. Their power was older than the Wolf King's. Their displeasure had ended men. Sit, child, Lady Saren said. Her voice was soft and pleasant. We will not be long. Maris did not sit. The Alpha King had not spoken yet. His jaw was set. My king, Lady Saren said, turning her ice-pale eyes on him. The Stone Council has received certain reports concerning the events in your great hall some weeks ago. Reports of a working performed upon the body of your son. Reports of a working that, by the High Pack laws, is forbidden in any blood that is not of the Council's recognized lines. My son is alive, the Alpha King said quietly. Yes, she agreed, and we rejoice in it. Sincerely, my king, we do. Her mouth curved. But the law does not bend for joy. The girl who performed this working is, by the strict reading, a hill woman of common blood. The penalty is fixed. The council requires her surrender, for examination, and for such judgment as the law sets down. The chamber was silent. Maris felt the floor tilt very gently under her feet. She had known. She had known from the first moment she stepped out of the alcove. She had known when her grandmother had whispered the names of the 3 women when she had first promised. The penalty was fixed. The council had come for her. The Alpha King did not move. No, he said. Lady Saren tilted her head. My king. No, he said again. My king. With respect, you cannot refuse. The law of the council is the law of the realm. Your own father signed the High Pack laws into stone. Your own grandfather presided over the trials of the last hillwomen. To refuse is to break the council. To break the council is to invite a vote of no confidence in your kingship. Your house has not faced such a vote in 9 generations. Her voice remained perfectly soft. Surely you do not mean to risk your throne over a kitchen girl. I mean, the Alpha King said very evenly, to risk anything you ask me to risk. She does not leave this keep. Lady Saren looked at him for a long moment, then she smiled. It was not a cruel smile exactly. It was something worse. It was the smile of a woman who had foreseen this exact answer, and had already chosen her next move, and was only waiting for the right beat to reveal it. My king, she said gently, I had hoped you would say so. She lifted one gloved hand. From the inner pocket of her cloak she drew a folded parchment, sealed in pale gray wax with the 4-pointed star of the Stone Council. She set it on the table and slid it across the polished oak toward him. The council anticipated the possibility of your refusal, she said, and so the council, with the unanimous voice of all 4 houses, has prepared an alternative. The Alpha King did not touch the parchment. Halric, beside him, picked it up, broke the seal, read it. His gray-bearded face went the color of old paper. He set it down in front of his king without a word. Vale read it. Maris watched his face. She saw the moment the breath left him. She saw the moment his amber eyes lifted slowly from the parchment and sought hers across the room. The look in them was not a king's. It was a wolf's. A wolf that has been driven, after long running, into a corner from which it cannot see a way out. My king, Lady Saren said in the same soft, pleasant voice, the council offers you a choice. Either the girl is surrendered to us, here, today, or, by the unanimous decree of the 4 houses, you will take a daughter of the council to wife by the next full moon, and the girl, under the protection of that union, will be permitted to remain in your household as a servant only, never to lift her hand in any working again, on penalty of removal. The room had gone very, very still. A wedding, Halric said hoarsely. You bring my king a wedding contract. A council bride? Lady Saren agreed. A daughter of one of our 4 houses, to bind your majesty into the council's protection, and to ensure that no further unsanctioned working ever issues from beneath your roof. The choice of bride is the council's. We have already named her. She did not even glance at the parchment. My niece, she said softly. Lady Iselva of House Ostrenmark. My brother's daughter. She is 23 years old, of unbroken bloodline, and she has been prepared for this honor since girlhood. She turned her ice-pale eyes on Maris for the first time. Her smile widened by the smallest fraction. You may keep your kitchen girl, my king, she said gently, or you may keep your throne, but by the law of the 4 houses, you will not keep both, and you will not keep her unwed. The Alpha King did not look at Lady Saren. He looked at Maris, and Maris, standing alone in the long stone chamber with her grandmother's voice screaming inside her head, watched the man who had laughed quietly in his son's bedroom 3 nights ago understand that he had just been handed a knife with 2 blades, and that whichever one he chose, it was going to cut her. The council room had become a held breath. Lady Saren waited with her gloved hands folded on the polished oak, her ice-pale eyes resting on the Alpha King with the patience of a woman who had no doubt of her ground. The captain of the guard, Halric, stood like a man who had been struck across the face. And Maris stood where she had stopped just inside the door, her own hands knotted into the folds of her dark green dress, listening to her grandmother's voice screaming inside her chest. Live a small life, live a long life. Promise me. Vale had not moved. He was looking at Maris, and only at Maris, as though there were no envoy at his table and no parchment under his hand, and no ancient council in the south whose displeasure had ended men. His amber eyes were not the eyes of a king now. They were the eyes of a man who had been pushed, very deliberately, to the edge of a cliff, and was being asked, very politely, which way he would prefer to fall. Maris made the choice for him. She had to. She could feel his answer building in his chest like a snarl, and she knew that if he spoke it, the throne his father had won, and his grandfather had won, and 9 generations of wolf blood had won, would be gone before the bell tower struck the hour. She stepped forward. Your Majesty, she said, and her voice was steadier than her hands. I will go with the lady. It is the right of the council. I have broken the law. I have known I broke it from the moment I lifted my hand. I will not see the realm divided over me. No, Vial said. The single word came out low and rough, the kind of sound a wolf makes before it springs. Your Majesty, please. I said no, Maris. He stood up from the table. Halric flinched. Even Lady Saren, who had not flinched at anything in the entire conversation, drew herself a fraction straighter in her chair, and the small amused curve at the corner of her mouth thinned into something more careful. The Alpha King set both hands flat on the polished oak and leaned over the parchment as though he could bend it back into wax by will alone. My lady, he said to the envoy, very quietly, you will give me 3 days. My king, the council? 3 days. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. You came to my keep without herald and without standard, and you placed this on my table without warning. You will give me 3 days to consider it, and you will keep your hand from the girl while you wait, or you will return to the south with my answer pinned to your saddle, and I will let your council decide what to make of it. For a long moment, Lady Saren did not move. Then, slowly, she inclined her head. 3 days, my king, she said softly. Of course. The council is a patient body. We will be guests in the eastern wing until your decision is given. She rose. Her smile had returned, but it was a smaller and more thoughtful smile now, and her ice-pale eyes lingered on Maris for one extra heartbeat before she turned away. Mistress Maris, be at peace. Whatever His Majesty decides, you have my personal word that no harm will come to you in the course of the next 3 days. The council does not act in haste. She made it sound like a kindness. Maris understood that it was not. The envoy swept her hood back over her pale hair and walked out of the long stone chamber, and the heavy oak door closed behind her with a sound that felt, to Maris, like the closing of a coffin lid. Halric let out a breath that he had clearly been holding for several minutes. "My king," he began, "we must speak. We must summon the inner council. We must—" "Out, Halric!" "My king, please. Out. Now." The captain of the guard hesitated only a moment. Then he bowed, once, deeply, and left them. The door closed again. For a long moment the Alpha King did not turn around. He stood with his hands flat on the oak table, his shoulders rising and falling once, twice, as though he were forcing himself to breathe slowly. Maris could see, even from across the room, the small, fine tremor running through the muscle of his forearm. "Vale," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. His head bowed as though she had laid a weight upon it. "Maris," he said without turning. "Please tell me you understand what she has just done." "I understand. She has not given me a choice. She has given me an instrument." He turned then. His amber eyes were terrible. "If I refuse the wedding, the 4 houses pull their support, and my throne falls, and you are taken anyway, because there will be no king to stop them. If I accept the wedding, I bind myself for life to a woman whose family has just used my dying son as leverage, and you are kept in this keep as a kitchen girl for the rest of your days, and I am asked to live across the corridor from you and never lay eyes on you again." He stopped. He had said more than he meant to. Maris's heart was doing the strange, unhelpful thing it had been doing for 3 weeks. "Your Majesty," she began, "do not. Your Majesty, the second is the only choice you can make. You know it. I know what they want me to know. You have a son." The word struck him almost visibly. He closed his eyes. "I have a son," he repeated, "and he is alive, and you are his only parent, and if you lose this throne, the Stone Council will not allow him to keep his name. They will marry him off at 12 to one of their cousins. They will erase his line. They have been waiting to erase the Wolf Kings for 9 generations, Vile, and you cannot give them the chance. Not over a kitchen girl whose worst sin in the world has been a single use of her hands." "You are not a kitchen girl." She said nothing. "You are not a kitchen girl, Maris." He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her, the same careful pace away that he always stopped, the pace of a man who did not entirely trust himself to come closer. But this time he closed it. He lifted both hands and set them, very gently, on either side of her face, the calluses of a swordsman's fingers warm against the line of her jaw. "Look at me," he said. She looked. "I will marry the council bride," he said quietly. "I will sign their parchment. I will keep my throne and my son and my kingdom, because you are right. You are right, and I have always known it. But I want you to hear me, Maris. I want you to hear this and never forget it. Not in 3 days, not in 3 years, not on the night they put their daughter beside me at the altar. Hear me. I am listening. I have not been a man for a long time," he said. "I have been a king. I have been a father. I have been a widower. I have not been a man." His thumb moved, just once, along the line of her cheekbone. "And then I walked through a corridor of linens, 3 years ago, and a girl with kitchen ash on her hem nearly walked straight into me. And she looked up at me, and for one moment I forgot that I was a king. For one moment I was only a man, looking at a woman, and the wolf inside my chest lifted its head for the first time since my wife had passed. I told myself I had imagined it. I told myself it was nothing. And then a kitchen girl walked out of an alcove on the worst night of my life and put her hand on my son's chest, and I understood that I had not imagined anything at all. Maris could not speak. You will hear in 3 days that I have agreed to the council's terms, Vale said. You will see me sign their contract. You will perhaps even see me stand at an altar and put a ring on a stranger's hand, because that is the price the 4 houses have set upon your life, and I will pay it. But you are not to believe, Maris, not for a single hour, that any part of me is in that ring. Do you understand me? Vale, do you understand me? Yes. His forehead came down to rest against hers. They stood like that, in the empty council room, for what could have been a single breath or 100. Maris closed her eyes. She felt the roughness of his skin against hers. She felt the soft, controlled tremor of his breath. She felt, somewhere far below the level of words, the quiet, frightened singing of the gift in her chest. It was singing toward him. It was singing as though it recognized him. She did not know yet what that meant. She would not know for some time. Vale drew back. He did not kiss her. He did not even let his hand fall to her shoulder. He stepped back the careful pace, and the careful pace, and the careful pace again, until he was at the table once more, with the parchment of the stone council under his hand. 3 days, he said. 3 days, she answered. She did not know, as she walked out of the council room with her hands knotted into the folds of her dress, that the woman in the blue cloak had stopped, on her way back to the eastern wing, in a small alcove of the lower corridor. She did not know that the woman had taken a folded letter from the inner pocket of her gown, and a small black wax seal in the shape of a closed eye, and pressed the seal into the wax, and given the letter into the hand of a writer whose face Maris had never seen. She did not know that the letter, in its careful hand, contained only one line. 3 days will be enough, my lord. Prepare the second cup. 2 days passed. They passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Maris went back to Calinor's chambers and helped him with his lessons and his meals and his endless games, and she did not let her face show when the boy looked up at her, the thing that was breaking very slowly inside her chest. Vale did not come at night. He sent a steward instead, a kind gray-eyed man named Roland, who told Calinor that his father was in council until very late and would visit him as soon as the council allowed. Calinor accepted this without protest, in the way of children who have learned that fathers belong partly to other people. Maris read him to sleep with a book about a wolf cub who lost his way in a snowstorm and was found by the moon. On the 3rd afternoon, the household began to prepare for the wedding. The seamstresses came up the back stairs carrying bolts of pale cream silk. The kitchen began to roast meats for a feast. A small carriage was sent down the long road, in haste, to bring Lady Iselva of House Ostrenmark up from a holding 2 valleys to the south. The bell ringers were summoned, the chapel was opened. By dusk the eastern wing was full of voices and lamplight and the clatter of hurried preparation. Maris lit the fire in Calinor's chamber and drew the heavy curtain across the window. She would not see the ceremony. The Alpha King had given an order that she was to be excused from any duty that would require her presence in the great hall on this night, and Calinor was to be kept in his chamber, and only Roland was to attend to either of them. Maris was glad of it. She did not know if she could have stood at the back of the hall and watched it. Calinor was unusually quiet at his supper. He picked at his bread. He turned his cup of warm milk in his small hands without drinking it. "May," he said at last. "Yes, little wolf. Are you sad?" "No, little wolf." He looked up at her. His amber eyes in the firelight were so much his father's that she could not bear it. "You are lying," he said, very gently. Not accusing, just naming a thing. She sat down on the edge of his small bed. She set down his cup. She gathered him into her arms, and she pressed her face into his dark, soft hair, and for a moment she let herself feel, all at once, every grief she had been holding at arm's length for 3 days. The grief of her grandmother's broken promise, the grief of a wedding she could not stop, the grief of a man whose forehead had rested against hers in an empty council room, and who would, in less than an hour, place a silver ring upon another woman's hand. "I am a little sad, little wolf," she whispered. "Yes. Father is sad too. I know. May." He pulled back. He put his small hands on either side of her face, the way she had seen his father do, and he looked into her eyes with the deadly seriousness of a 6-year-old. "When I am the king, I am going to make a different law. I am going to make a law that says you and father can be sad together, instead of separately." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. "Eat your bread, little wolf," she said. He ate his bread. Down in the great hall, somewhere far below them, the bells began to ring. And in the long west corridor outside Calinor's chamber, where Roland sat alone on a wooden stool with his sword across his knees, a hooded figure in dark gray wool drifted up out of the servant's stair without a sound, lifted a small black bottle to the lip of a steaming cup, and tipped 2 careful drops of clear liquid into the warm milk that had not yet been carried inside. Maris never tasted the milk. It was Calinor who reached for the cup first, the way Calinor always reached for everything first, and Maris, who had been sitting on the edge of his bed, with her eyes turned toward the curtained window, and her mind turned toward the bells in the great hall, did not realize what he had done until his small face crumpled in confusion, and the cup tipped from his fingers, and a thin trail of warm milk ran down his chin. "May," he whispered, "it tastes wrong." The cup struck the floor. For one heartbeat, Maris thought he had only spilled it. Then she saw his eyes. The amber was draining out of them. It was not a thing she would have known how to name before the night she had laid her hands on his chest in the great hall. But she knew it now. She had felt it before. The cold thing she had drawn out of him 3 weeks ago had not been the only one of its kind in this world, and whatever was in that cup had a shape close enough to its shape that her gift recognized it the moment she touched the boy's wrist and felt his pulse stutter. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no, little wolf, no, look at me, Calinor, look at me." "May," he said, very small. His head fell forward into the curve of her neck. Maris was already moving. She caught him against her chest. She lowered him to the floor. She tore the curtain off its rod and threw it under his head as a pillow. Her hands were trembling so badly that she could not at first remember how to call the gift up. She forced herself to breathe. She forced herself to count. She pressed her right palm flat over the boy's heart, the way she had pressed it 3 weeks ago, and she let the silver blue light come up out of her chest with a force that made her teeth lock together. It came faster this time. It came angrier. "Help!" she screamed at the door. "Help! Help the prince! Help me! Help me!" Roland burst into the chamber with his sword out. He took one look at Calinor on the floor, at the spilled cup, at the silver blue light spilling out of Maris's hands, and the color drained out of his face so completely that for a moment Maris thought he too had been poisoned. Then he turned on his heel and ran. She heard his boots strike the corridor stones. She heard him shouting. She heard him hammering on a door somewhere far down the wing. A door that should not have been hammered on the night of an Alpha King's wedding. The cold thing inside Calinor was not like the first cold thing. The first had been a slow, patient parasite, settled in for a long meal. This was a small, focused blade. It had been made by a hand that had made things like it before, and made many of them, and it knew exactly which thread of the boy's small, bright spirit to cut, and it was already cutting. Maris followed the silver blue light down with her mind and gripped the cold thing in both hands and pulled. It tore. It hurt the way a knife hurts when it is dragged out of a wound. Calinor cried out without waking. His small body arched off the floor. Maris held him steady with her free hand and pulled harder, and the cold thing twisted in her grip and bit. The bite was not in her hand. The bite was in her chest. She felt something very deep inside her, something her grandmother had once warned her about and never named, give way under the cold thing's teeth. She did not stop pulling. She would not stop pulling. Behind her, somewhere in a hallway that was no longer real to her, she heard heavy boots running. She heard Roland's voice raised, and a woman's voice, sharp and shocked. And then, cutting cleanly through both, a low, terrible sound she had never heard before, but knew at once. The sound a wolf makes when it has been told that its pup is dying. Vale. The chamber door was struck open so hard that it cracked against the stone. He came across the room in 3 strides. He dropped to his knees beside her on the floor. He did not ask. He did not speak. He saw the cup and the boy and the silver blue light, and his amber eyes went wolf-bright at once, and he laid his great warm hand over Maris's hand on the boy's chest as though he could lend her his strength through her bones. He could. Maris felt it the moment he touched her. Some kind of warm wild river ran out of his palm and up her arm and into the silver blue light, and the light surged, and the cold thing in Calinor's chest screamed, and she pulled it free with one last savage wrench and flung it from her, and it dissolved into the firelight and was gone. Calinor drew a breath, a real breath, a child's breath. His amber returned. For one shaking moment neither Maris nor Vale moved. They knelt together on the chamber floor with the small body of the boy between them, their hands stacked one over the other on his chest, their faces inches apart. Vale was breathing as though he had run for miles. The mark on his cheekbone, the small one from the morning's training, had reopened. "May," Calinor said muzzily, "why is everyone on the floor?" Maris made a sound that might have been a laugh, and was certainly a sob. Vale lifted his son into his arms. He held the boy against his shoulder for a long moment, his eyes closed, his mouth pressed to the soft, dark hair. Then he opened his eyes and looked at Maris across the curve of his son's head, and the look in them was no longer the look of a king holding a corner. It was the look of a wolf that had been pushed past its last patience. "Tell me how this happened," he said quietly. "The milk," Roland said from the doorway. He was still pale. His sword was still in his hand. "My king, the milk. It was on the tray. I sat the entire time outside the door. I did not leave the tray. He stopped. His face went paler still. There was a moment. When the bells began. I stood up, my king. I stepped to the corner of the corridor only to listen for a heartbeat. The tray was unattended for a count of perhaps 30. "A count of 30, Vile repeated. "My king, I will fall on my own sword, No." Vale did not raise his voice. "No, Roland. You were placed to guard a door. You were not told to expect one in the household on the night of my own wedding. The blame is not yours. I will tell you whose blame it is in a moment." He stood up with his son in his arms. The bells in the great hall were still ringing. Maris, climbing slowly to her feet, suddenly understood. Her gift, even ragged from the pulling, sang a small clear note inside her chest. She understood the shape of it the way her grandmother had taught her to understand shapes. "Vale," she said. He looked at her. "They did not mean to take him," she said softly. "Not really. They meant to make me use the gift. In front of witnesses. On the night of the wedding, with the council bride on her way up the aisle and the stone council's envoy in the next room, and every noble of the 4 houses gathered under your roof. They meant to put me in a chamber where I would have to choose between a child's life and the law I was forbidden to break. And they meant to be the ones who walked in afterward and named me a hill woman in front of every living witness who matters in this realm." Vale had gone very still. "They meant to force my hand," he said, while I stood at an altar. "Yes. They meant to make me publicly reject either you or the wedding. Yes. They meant to break my throne tonight. Yes," she whispered. He looked down at the boy in his arms. Calliner had already fallen, exhausted, into the deep, clean sleep of a child whose body has been emptied of poison and given back to itself. His small fingers were curled into the front of his father's coat. Vale bent his head and kissed his son's hair, very gently, and then he lifted his eyes to Maris, and the wolf in them was not a corner wolf any longer. It was something else. "Roland," he said, my king. Send for Halric. Send for every man you trust in the inner guard. Lock the eastern wing. No one leaves it. No one enters it. The envoy of the Stone Council is to be detained in her chamber under guard, and she is to understand, very clearly, that she is detained and not invited. The chapel is to be cleared. The bells are to be silenced. The lady from the south will return, with her father's blessing and not a hair of her head harmed, to the carriage that brought her up this hill, and the carriage will leave my keep tonight. My king, Roland said hoarsely, the wedding. There is no wedding. My king, the council will... I know what the council will do. Vel's amber eyes did not move from Mayeris. Send for Halric. Roland left at a run. Vielle walked across the chamber and laid his sleeping son in the great carved bed and drew the blankets up to his chin. Then he turned and crossed back to where Maris was standing in the middle of the room, with her hands still glowing very faintly silver at her sides, and he stopped in front of her, and he did not stop the careful pace away this time. He closed the careful pace. He took her face in both his hands. Maris, he said. Vielle. They tried to take my son to break my throne. I will not be giving them my throne. I will not be giving them you. His voice was very low. I should have refused them at the table. I am refusing them now. There is no wedding. There will be no wedding. There has not been a wedding from the first moment they sat down across from me with that parchment, and I should have known it from the first moment, and I am sorry, Maris. I am sorry I made you stand in that room and offer to walk out with her. She could not speak. He bent his head and rested his forehead against hers. It was the second time. It felt, this time, like a first. I do not know yet what I am asking of you, he said. I do not know yet what this is. I only know that when I felt your hand under mine on my son's chest tonight, something in me that has been alone for a very long time recognized something in you. And I do not know what to do with that, except to ask you not to leave this keep, no matter what comes through its gates in the next month. Will you stay? Vale? Will you stay, Maris? Yes, she whispered. She did not see his face when she said it. She felt his breath leave him, all at once, against her temple. She felt his hands tighten, very gently, on her jaw. He did not kiss her. He drew back, and he looked at her once, the long, unreadable look of an alpha king who had been driven into a corner and had finally chosen to come out of it the other way. And then he turned and went out of the chamber to break a council that had been unbroken for 9 generations. The bells in the great hall stopped ringing. The corridors of Corvath Keep filled very quickly with the sound of running boots. And Maris, alone with the sleeping child, sat down on the edge of his bed and pressed her shaking hands flat against her thighs and tried, without success, to stop them from glowing. She did not know yet that her grandmother's old warning had had a second half. She did not know yet what happened in the women of her line when the gift was used twice in 3 weeks on the same wolf-blooded child. She did not know yet that the soft, frightened bird in her chest, which had begun to sing the night Vielle first laughed in this very room, was no longer a small, frightened bird at all. It was something with very large wings, and somewhere far below the keep, in a fold of the old hill country none of the wolf kings had ever conquered, an old man with eyes the color of river ice set down a porcelain cup, lifted his head, and listened, with a thin smile, to a wind that had begun, very quietly, to blow. The sound of the bells stopping was, for the household of Corvath Keep, more frightening than the sound of the bells beginning. Wedding bells were rung in a long, joyous peal that flowed naturally to its end. These bells stopped mid-peal, as though a hand had been laid flat across the bronze. Maris, sitting on the edge of Calinor's bed 2 floors above the kitchens, could hear the silence afterward. She could hear the distant, confused murmur of the guests in the great hall, the rising of voices that did not yet understand they were being asked to leave. She could hear the heavy run of boots in the corridors. She could hear, somewhere nearer, a woman beginning to cry out very softly in pure rage. Lady Saren, she thought. She did not think it with satisfaction. She thought it with a cold, watchful animal fear that was new to her chest and that her grandmother had also never named. The door to Calinor's chamber opened. Halric stepped through it with his sword drawn. The gray-bearded captain of the guard had the look of a man who had aged 5 years in the past quarter hour. He took in the sleeping boy, the spilled cup still on the floor, the faint silver-blue light that was still pulsing very softly under the skin of Maris's hands, and he did not waste a word. "Mistress Maris," he said, "you will come with me." "Where?" "To a chamber the king has made ready. The eastern wing is no longer a place I can defend. The envoy is detained. Her riders are detained. But the household is not yet sealed, and there are servants in this keep tonight whose loyalties I have not had time to test." He glanced at the boy. "The prince comes too. The king's order. I am not to leave either of you out of my sight until he comes for you himself." Maris gathered Calinar up into her arms. He was deep asleep, deeper than the sleep of an ordinary tired child, and his small head rolled against her shoulder with the trust of a creature that had already chosen her. "Halric," she said, "the wedding." "There is no wedding, mistress." "And the king." "Is in the great hall." Halric's mouth pulled, telling 4 houses of the Stone Council in front of every noble currently under his roof exactly what was done to his son tonight. "I am told he is being very plain about it." She did not see the great hall. She would never, in fact, see what Vale said in that hall. She would only ever know it the way the rest of the kingdom would know it, in the form of the story that ran out of Corvath Keep. That night, on the back of every messenger and trader and wandering minstrel who had been within a mile of the gates. The story that the Alpha King had walked into his own wedding hall with his sleeping son in his arms, and had laid the boy down on the high table where the wedding feast had been set, and had pulled aside the silk of the boy's nightshirt to show the small, dark mark above his heart where the second poison had sat, and had said, in a voice the back rows of the hall heard as clearly as the front, "This is what the Stone Council has done in my house tonight. This is what the 4 houses have asked me to bow down to. I will not bow." The story that the Lady Iselva of House Ostrenmark, 23 years old and dressed in her wedding silks, had stood very straight in the aisle and had not wept. That she had only looked at the king for a long moment and at the sleeping child, and had then said, in a clear, soft voice that carried, "My king, I did not know." And the story that Vile had answered her, "I believe you, my lady. Go home to your father. Tell him what you have seen." The story that Lady Saren had not been in the hall. The story that Lady Saren had been found, by Halric and 4 men of the inner guard, in a small chamber of the eastern wing with a half-burnt letter in her hand and a small black wax seal in the shape of a closed eye on the table beside her, and that she had laughed when she was taken. That was the story that ran out of the keep that night. Maris, in the small windowless inner chamber where Halric placed her with the sleeping prince, heard none of it as it happened. She heard only the muffled rush of feet in the corridor outside, and the slow, steady breathing of the child against her shoulder, and the low, banked hum of her own gift refusing now to sit back down inside her chest. It would not lie still. She had used it twice on the same wolf-blooded child in 3 weeks, and the second time she had drawn a Maid poison out of him, a thing crafted by a deliberate hand, and her grandmother had warned her, once, in a sentence Maris had not understood at the age of 11 and was beginning to understand now. The gift is a measuring cup, child. Use it small and it stays small. Use it deep and it deepens. Use it deeper than you are, and it will make you bigger to hold it. Maris's hands would not stop glowing. The light was very soft. It was not the bright silver blue of the working itself. It was something quieter, something that seemed to live just under her skin. She could see it most clearly along the inside of her wrists and at the base of her throat, where a faint pulsing line of pale light moved in time with her heartbeat. When she pressed her palms together, the light did not go out. It only sank deeper, like a lamp put under a cloth. She was not afraid of it. That, more than anything, surprised her. The door of the small chamber opened and closed, and Vielle came through it. He was no longer in the dark coat he had worn into the council room 3 days ago. He had taken off the ceremonial sash of the cancelled wedding. His linen shirt was open at the throat and there was a darkness on his cuff. Not much, only the smear of a single mark, and it was not from his own veins. Maris did not ask whose. He crossed the room and he sat down on the bench beside her without a word. He looked down at his sleeping son. He laid his hand, very lightly, over Calinor's small dark head. For a long moment he did not speak. Then he said, very quietly, "She has named names. Lady Saren. She has named her brother, who sent her. She has named 2 other lords of the Stone Council, who knew. She has named one of the lower kitchens, who has been ours for 8 years, and who took her gold without flinching. The poisoner is in irons. Halric has men on every road to the south. The brother will not be taken tonight. He sits in a black tower a hard night's ride from here, and he has, I am told, 300 household swords, and the loyalty of 2 of the 4 houses, and he will know within a day and a half that his sister is mine." Vale breathed out. "I have started a war, Maris. You did not start it. I have refused a council that has not been refused in 9 generations. I have detained the envoy of the 4 houses on a charge of attempted murder of the heir. By every reading of the High Pack laws, I have set my throne against the oldest body in this realm." He turned his head and looked at her. "And I would do it again. Val, I would do it again tonight." She did not know what to say. He lifted his hand from his son's head and turned it over and laid it, palm up, in the space between them on the bench. An open hand, an offering. He did not reach for her. He waited. After a long moment, Maris laid her hand on top of his. The faint, pale light under her skin brightened. His amber eyes flickered. "It is still in you," he said softly. "It will not lie down. Does it hurt?" "No. It is only that I do not yet know what shape it is becoming." He closed his fingers, very gently, around hers. "Maris," he said, "when I came through the door of the boys' chamber tonight, and I laid my hand over yours, I felt something pass between us. I do not know its name. I have heard old stories. My grandmother's grandmother used to tell them, in a dialect of the High Pack tongue that the council struck out of the books. She said that when a wolf of the king-making blood lays his hand over the hand of a still hand of the old hill country, in a working of true intent, a thing happens that the council did not want remembered. She would not tell me what the thing was. She said it was a thing for the 2 who felt it, and for no one else." Maris's heart was moving very strangely inside her chest. "My grandmother told me a thing as well," she said. "Tell me." "She told me that the women of our line did not bond, that the still hand stayed alone, because the gift was a small lamp, and a lamp could not be split between 2 carriers without going out." Maris swallowed. "She told me never to lie down beside a wolf of the high blood. She did not tell me why. I think she did not know why. I think the council struck her line stories, too. Vale's thumb moved, once, against the back of her hand. I think, he said, very quietly, that my grandmother and your grandmother were warning their granddaughters about the same thing from opposite sides of the fire. Maris did not breathe. I think, he went on, that your line and mine were not meant to be apart. I think the council knew it. I think that is why the hill women were driven away, and the king-making blood was bred narrow, and the two stories were broken out of the books. I do not have proof. I have only what passed through my hand into yours tonight, and what is moving in your hand under mine right now, and the fact that my son is sleeping there, and breathing. He looked at her. Tell me if I am wrong, Maris. She could not tell him he was wrong. The soft light under her skin was singing. It was singing toward him, the way it had sung toward him in the council room, but louder now, surer, with the unmistakable pull of a thread that had finally found the other end of itself. Vale, she whispered. He bent his head, and he laid his forehead against hers for the third time, and this time he did not draw back. I am not asking tonight, he said softly. I am not asking under my own roof while my son is asleep 3 feet away, and a war is starting in the south. But when the war is ended, Maris, and the boy is safe, and the stone council is broken, I am going to ask. I want you to know I am going to ask, so that if the answer is no, you will have had time to choose it slowly. Vale, do you understand? Yes. Do you know yet what your answer is? Yes. He went very still. Do not tell me yet, he said hoarsely. Not tonight. Tell me after. Tell me when there is no contract on the table and no envoy in my eastern wing and no poison on my son's mouth. Tell me when it is only you and me. I want to be only a man when you tell me, Maris, not a king. She closed her eyes and pressed her forehead more firmly against his. Yes, Val, she whispered. I will tell you then. It was, she would think afterward, the closest thing to a vow either of them spoke that night. And it was the moment her hands, of their own accord and without her permission, stopped glowing. The light did not go out. She could still feel it, banked deep in her chest. But it had quieted itself, the way a fire quiets when it has been brought safely indoors. It had been waiting, Maris understood, for him to say it. A heavy knock came at the chamber door. Halric stepped through. His face was the face of a man who had not yet been allowed to rest. My king, he said. A rider has come up the south road, alone, under truce flag. He asks to be heard before the dawn. Whose rider? He carries the seal of Lord Dreven Ostrenmark. Halric paused. He says, my king that his lord wishes to offer terms. He says his lord will return your envoy to the south, withdraw the wedding contract, and give you the names of the 2 lords who knew of the poisoning, in exchange for one thing only. In exchange for what? Halric's eyes moved very briefly to Maris. In exchange, he said, for the still hand, by dawn, at the south gate, alive. The small windowless chamber went very quiet. Maris felt Vale's hand close around hers, hard. She felt also, in the same moment, a thing she had not felt before. A small, sharp, watchful pull from somewhere outside the keep. A pull that knew her name. A pull that had been waiting, with the patience of a thing that had been waiting for a very long time, for her to use the gift twice on a wolf-blooded child in 3 weeks, so that it could find her. The old man in the black tower. She did not yet know his name. She would, by sunrise. The small windowless chamber held the silence of a held breath. Halric had not moved from the door. The rider's offer hung in the air between them like a thrown knife that had not yet decided where to land. In exchange for the still hand, by dawn, at the south gate, alive. Vale's hand was still closed around Maris's, hard enough that she felt the bones of his fingers. Halric, he said, without taking his eyes off her. Where is the rider? In the lower courtyard, under guard. He has not been disarmed. He came under truce flag and I have not yet broken it. Keep it unbroken. Give him bread and water. Tell him his answer will come at dawn. A pause. Send for me the moment the south road shows torches. My king. And Halric. Vile's voice did not rise. If anything moves toward this chamber that I have not sent, stop it before you ask its name. My king. The captain bowed and left. The door closed and Maris was alone with the Alpha King and the sleeping child and the new soft pull from outside the walls. She felt it now the way one feels a draft, not loud, not shouting. Only a thin, steady thread reaching through the stone of the keep and wrapping very lightly around the place under her collarbone where the gift lived. It had not been there an hour ago. It had been, perhaps, there earlier in the day, but small enough to be ignored. Tonight it had grown teeth. Vale, she said. I know. I felt your hand change. He is calling me. Who is calling you? The man in the black tower. The one Lady Saren sent her letters to. I do not know his face. I know his pull. She looked up. It is the same shape as the second poison vial. The same hand made both. He is the one who put the cold thing in Kalinor in the beginning. He is the one who taught Lady Saren how to make the second cup. He has been hunting for someone like me for a very long time. He has finally found one. Vale's amber eyes were steady. Why? I do not know yet. Guess. She drew a slow breath. Because the still hands of the old hill country are the only living craft that can break what he makes, and he is making something very large, and he wants the only remaining knife that can cut it sitting in his cellar, not in the king's chamber. Vile was quiet a long time. I am not giving you to him, he said finally. I know. I am not negotiating. I am not trading. I am not standing at any gate at any dawn while you walk down a road toward a black tower. I know, Vielle. Tell me you are not about to suggest it. She almost smiled. She almost could not. I am not about to suggest it, she said. I am about to suggest something else. What? That we go to him? He went still. Maris. Listen to me. She turned her hand over inside his and laced her fingers through his fingers, the first time she had ever done so, and his amber eyes flickered at the small gesture. He is expecting one thing. He is expecting a frightened kitchen girl walked down a road by a king's truce. He is expecting to receive a gift. He is not expecting a still hand who has used the gift twice on the heir of the Wolf Kings in 3 weeks, and who is now bonded in some way neither of us yet has the words for, to the Alpha King of the realm. He does not know what we are to each other. He cannot. The last time anything like us walked the world together, the council struck the books. Vale's jaw worked. You are telling me, he said slowly, that we are stronger than he thinks. I am telling you I felt it tonight, when you laid your hand over mine on the boy. You opened something in me. I did not know it was there. I have been carrying a small lamp for 7 years, Vielle, and tonight something stepped behind the lamp and was a sun. I do not yet know how to use it, but I know its size. He stared at her. And you would walk it into a black tower. I would walk it into a black tower with you. For a long moment he did not speak. Then, very gently, he lifted her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to her knuckles, the way a knight in an old story would have kissed a queen's hand, and the soft light under her skin bloomed once and quieted again. My brave, he whispered, my impossible. Halric, when he was called back into the chamber and given the plan, looked at his king as though the king had asked him to swallow a sword. He did not argue. He had been Halric for 30 years, and he had learned, somewhere along the way, when his king's voice meant a thing that could not be undone. He only said, How many men, my king? 40. 40 is not enough. 40 is what we can move down the south road tonight without the brother knowing we are coming. The rider in the courtyard goes back to him at dawn with my answer. By the time the answer reaches him, we will be inside his walls. My king, 40 against 300 household swords in a black tower. 40, Vale said, and a still hand. Halric looked at Maris. He had been a soldier of the Wolf King since before her mother was born. He had watched the high pack laws applied to women like her 3 times in his career. He had stood honor guard at the trials. His gray-bearded face was not a kind face, but it was, Maris saw, an honest face. And what was in it now, when his eyes met hers, was not the contempt of the laws he had served. It was the look of a man who had come, late in his life, to a doorway he had not known was there. "Mistress," he said, "I owe you an apology I will give you in full when we are home from this. For tonight I will only say, I will be at your back. If anyone in that tower lays a hand on you, they will have to come through me first." "Captain," she whispered. 40, he said to Vielle. "I will have them in the south yard within the hour." The keep moved. 40 men of the inner guard saddled 40 horses in a courtyard, lit only by shielded lanterns. The rider under the truce flag was held in a side chamber where he could not see the south yard. Kalinor, still deep in the clean sleep of a child whose body had been emptied of poison and given back to itself, was placed in the care of Roland, who was given a sword, 4 men, and an order from his king that needed no elaboration. The Lady Iselva's carriage was already 3 valleys to the south by the time the riders mounted. Lady Saren sat in irons in a small inner cell with her ice-pale hair coming undone around her shoulders, and her smile still, somehow, in place. Maris rode in front of Vale on his great black horse. She had ridden a horse perhaps 4 times in her life. She did not need to ride this one. Vale's arm was iron around her waist, and his chest was warm against her back, and the great animal beneath them moved as though the king's body and its body had been carved from the same wood. The night wind was cold and clean and tasted very faintly of pine. They rode for hours. Somewhere past the 3rd hour, Maris felt the pull from the black tower change. It had been a thin thread before. Now it was a hand. The man who had set it had felt her come down off the high road, and he had understood that she was not coming down it alone, and the hand of his pull tightened on her chest like a closing fist. She did not flinch. She set her own hand, very gently, over Vielle's, where it lay across her stomach. The faint pale light moved under her skin and into his. He drew a slow breath behind her. "He is pulling," she said. "I know. I feel it through you. He is angry. Good." The black tower stood at the head of a narrow valley, where 2 old roads met under 3 crooked pines. It had not been built by the Wolf Kings. It had been built by something older, in a stone that did not match any quarry in the realm, and it sat in its valley like a tooth that had been driven into a jaw. There was no town around it. There was only the tower, and a low wall, and a single iron gate. 40 men stopped on the high ridge above it, in the last hour before dawn, and looked down. "My king," Halric murmured, "there are no torches on the wall. He is waiting for us. He is." "Mistress?" Maris realized Halric was speaking to her. "Captain! Whatever you mean to do with that lamp under your skin, mistress, do it now or do it inside. I will get you to his door. I will not promise you the door will open easily." "It will open," she said quietly. It did. The single iron gate of the black tower stood unbarred when the 40 riders came down off the ridge in the gray light before sunrise. There were no household swords in the courtyard. There were no archers on the wall. The valley was so quiet that Maris could hear the small sound of a single bird waking in the crooked pines. Val lifted her down off the horse. "Stay behind me," he said. "No." "Maris?" "Val?" "He is waiting for me. Not for you. The door will not open for you. It will open for me. You walk behind me, my love, or it does not open at all." He had not heard her call him that before. He looked at her for a long moment in the gray light, and the look in his amber eyes was not the look of a king, and not the look of a wolf, and not the look of a man. It was, Maris thought, the look of all three at once, finally agreeing on the same thing. "Behind you," he said. "Half a step." She walked into the black tower with the Alpha King of the realm half a step behind her, and Halric, and 4 of his best men half a step behind him. The door of the great hall of the tower opened when she touched it. Inside, on a single high-carved chair at the end of a long stone room, sat an old man with hair the color of old iron and eyes the color of river ice. He was not large. He was not standing. He held a porcelain cup of something steaming in both hands as though he had been waiting for her with a fresh pot. Around him, on the floor of the long stone room, in 3 concentric rings, lay perhaps 200 small black objects. Maris looked at them, and her gift went cold under her ribs. They were cups. Like the cup that had been put on Kalinor's tray. Each one held 2 careful drops of clear liquid. Each one was bound, by a thread Maris could see and Vale could not, to a child somewhere in the realm. 200 children. She understood at once what the man in the black tower had been making. "Lord Draven Ostranmark," Vale said very quietly behind her shoulder. The old man's mouth curved. "Your Majesty," he said, "welcome to my house. And mistress. Mistress, mistress. I have been waiting for you for a very long time. Will you take a cup?" "No," Maris said. "A pity." She took one slow step forward into the long stone room. The 40 men at her back did not follow. They could not. The doorway behind her had become, in the last heartbeat, a wall of cold air that no wolf of the high blood could cross. Only Vale, half a step behind her, came through it. The door had opened for them. It had not opened for the men. She felt Halric strike his shoulder against the cold wall and recoil. She heard him call her name. "It is all right, Captain," she called back without turning. "Stay there. Hold the door. We will come back through it." "Mistress, please." "Hold the door, Captain." She walked another step forward. "You have been very busy, my lord," she said softly. 200 cups. 200 children. What were you going to do with them? Lord Dreven smiled. "Replace a kingdom, mistress. The wolf kings have grown small. The stone council has grown smaller. The 4 houses, your majesty, will not last another generation, with or without your refusal of my niece. I have looked into the next 100 years with eyes you do not have, and what I have seen is a realm of sleepwalking children and old men coughing in council chambers. I propose to wake the children. I propose to wake them all on the same night. The cups are keyed to me. When I drink mine, they drink theirs. When they wake, they will wake to a single voice. Yours. Mine. And the children whose bodies will not survive the waking." Lord Draven's smile did not move. "A few. Not so many. Children are resilient." "You would have begun with my son," Vale said. "I did begin with your son, your majesty. Your son was my proof of concept. He was failing because the cup I sent into your house 6 months ago was the prototype. The second cup was the corrected version. Your son would have woken, your majesty. He would have woken to me." The old man's ice-pale eyes moved to Maris. "And then, this one walked out of an alcove and put her hand on my prototype and pulled it out. And I understood, mistress, that the still hands were not as extinct as my colleagues had believed. I sent my sister to confirm it. My sister has confirmed it. Now you are here. Now you are here in my house. And I have, if you will forgive the indelicacy, 200 reasons for you to step into the inner ring and take a cup. I will not. You will. Or 200 children will not see the dawn after this one." The long stone room was very quiet. Maris felt Vael shift behind her. Not forward. He was holding to his half a step the way Halric was holding to the door. He had given her the first move, and he was not going to take it from her. She had asked him to walk behind her. He was walking behind her. She loved him so much in that moment that she almost could not breathe. She stepped into the first ring of cups. Maris, Vale said softly. It is all right, my love. She stepped into the second. Lord Draven watched her come. His ice-pale eyes were bright with anticipation. He set his porcelain cup down on the arm of his carved chair. He folded his hands in his lap. He had, Maris understood, prepared this room for one outcome and one only. A still hand walking into the inner ring, a still hand reaching for a cup, a still hand bound to him as the children were bound, by the same craft, the same hand, and the same closed eye. He had prepared the room for one still hand. He had not prepared it for two. Maris reached out behind her without looking and laid her hand, palm up, over her shoulder. Val laid his hand in hers. The pale light under her skin came up like a sunrise. It came up through her wrist and her arm and her chest and her throat. It came up through her hand and into Vale's hand, and back, through his arm and his chest and his throat. And where it met the wolf thing in him, the king-making blood that the council had bred narrow and the books had been struck for, it found the other end of itself, the way a thread finds the other end of itself, and the room went white. Lord Draven made a small sound. The 200 cups on the floor of the long stone room shattered, all at once, in 3 concentric rings of ringing porcelain. The clear liquid in them turned to a thin, oily black smoke, and the smoke rose, and the smoke fled. 200 small, fleeing things racing for the cracks under the stone, and Maris closed her hand on each of them with a will that was no longer entirely hers, and she pulled. The way she had pulled the cold thing out of Kalinor, the way she had pulled the second poison, but 200 times in a single beat of her heart. It should have undone her. It would have undone her. Alone. It did not undo her, because Vael's hand was in hers, and the wolf thing in him was pouring into the still hand thing in her, the way a great river pours into a mill race, and the mill race did not break. The 200 cold things tore free of the 200 sleeping children all over the realm and dissolved in the white light of the long stone room, and were gone. Lord Draven rose from his carved chair. He was not smiling now. His ice-pale eyes had gone wide. He understood, perhaps for the first time in his long, quiet life, what his colleagues had struck the books to bury. "You," he said, "you are not—" "No," Maris agreed softly. "I am not." She lifted her free hand. The pale light gathered in her palm and formed itself, very gently, into a small shape that she had not asked for and did not know the name of. A sphere of light, perhaps. A small contained sun. She did not throw it. She set it, with the care of a woman setting a candle on an altar, into the air in front of the carved chair. It hung there. "Lord Draven Ostrenmark," she said, and the harmonics in her voice were not entirely her own. "By the law your council wrote and the law your council struck, by the craft of the still hands and the blood of the wolf kings, by every child whose name is in this room tonight, and every child whose name was meant to be still." The old man tried to take a step backward. He could not. The small sun in the air turned, very slowly, the color of river ice. When it touched him, he did not break. He did not bleed. He simply stopped. He stood there in front of his carved chair with his ice-pale eyes wide and his mouth slightly open, frozen the way the cold thing in Kalinor had been frozen for 3 months, and Maris understood that she had done to him exactly what he had done, in slower form, to 200 sleeping children in 200 sleeping beds. It would hold him, she knew, as long as she chose to hold him. She chose, for now, to hold him until Halric could come through the door behind her with chains. The cold wall in the doorway dissolved. Halric and his 4 men were through it in a heartbeat. Maris did not see them take Lord Drevon. She had turned. She was looking at Vale. His amber eyes were full of tears. "My love," he said hoarsely. "My love." She stepped into him. He caught her against his chest. She felt his arms close around her with the desperate, careful tightness of a man who had thought, for the count of perhaps 3 breaths in a long stone room, that he was going to lose her, and her face went into the curve of his throat, and the pale light under her skin sank. Finally, all the way back down into her chest where it belonged. It did not go out. It would not, she understood, ever go out again. But it could rest now. It had found its other end. She lifted her face to his. "Vile," she whispered. "Yes, my love. I told you I would tell you when there was no contract on the table and no envoy in your eastern wing and no poison on your son's mouth. You did. There is none of those things now. There is none. My answer is yes." He made a sound that was not a word. He lowered his head, and he kissed her, in the long stone room of the broken tower, with 200 shattered cups at their feet, and the gray dawn coming in through the cracked east window, and Halric, 3 steps away, very deliberately turning his bearded face toward the wall. The kiss was not a king's kiss. It was a man's. It was the first. The realm took a long time to learn what had happened in the Black Tower at dawn. The story went out, as stories always went out of a wolf king's house, on the back of every messenger and trader and wandering minstrel within a week's ride. It went out in many forms. In the southern provinces, it became a story of 200 children waking from a sleeping sickness all on the same morning, and of mothers running into nurseries to find small, clear amber eyes opening. In the eastern coast, it became a story of a still hand walking into a tower of black stone behind an alpha king and walking back out again. In the high pack tongue, in dialects the council had tried to strike out of the books, it became, very quietly, an older story, told between grandmothers and granddaughters at winter fires. The story of a thing the 4 houses had buried 9 generations ago that had finally come back up out of the ground. Lord Draven Ostrenmark did not return to the south. He was held in the still hands working for the 8 days it took to ride him back to Corvath Keep, and another 12 days while the High Council of the Wolf Kings was summoned, and the surviving lords of the 4 houses were brought, under guard, into the great hall where his sister had once sat, across an oak table from a king. He was tried in the high pack tongue. The charges were read by Halric, who had never read a charge in court before in his life, and read this one in a voice that did not shake. The judgment was given by Vel, who pronounced it without raising his voice. The sentence was carried out at dawn the following day. Lady Saren was not given the same fate. Vel, on Maris's quiet asking, sent her instead to a small holding on the cold north coast, where she lived out her days as a woman of no name, with a single servant and a single window, and a single book of common psalms and no contact, until her death, with any house of the 4. She did not laugh, in the end. She had stopped laughing, the household servants said, on the morning the realm woke up to news of 200 unsealed children. The Stone Council was broken. 3 of the 4 houses signed the new High Pack laws within the year. The 4th, House Ostrenmark, did not exist by then. Its name had been struck. Its lands had been given, in equal portions, to the families of the children whose cups had shattered in a long stone room at dawn. The new High Pack laws contained, for the first time in 9 generations, a clause that recognized the still hands of the old hill country as a craft equal in standing to the wolf blood, and not subject to the old persecutions, and answerable only to the king's own court. Fael signed the clause with Maris's hand under his. He had, by then, married her. The wedding was small. It was held in the orchard behind Corvath Keep, on a warm spring morning, with the apple trees in white bloom over their heads, and Calanor between them holding both their hands. There were no envoys, there were no contracts. There was only a quiet old priest of the high pack tongue and 40 witnesses, most of them servants of the lower kitchens, and the Lady Iselva of House Ostrenmark, who had asked, very politely, by letter, whether she might come, and to whom Myris had written back, please. Iselva stood at the front of the witnesses with tears running down her face, and a small bouquet of the same apple bloom in her hands, and afterward she said to Maris in a clear, soft voice, Mistress, I did not know. I am glad it was you. Maris kissed her cheek. In the autumn of the next year, in a small warm room 2 floors above the kitchens of Corvath Keep, in the same narrow bed where she had once lain awake with her hand pressed flat between her collarbones, Maris gave her king a daughter. The girl had Vale's amber eyes and her mother's dark hair and, at the base of her throat, the faintest pulsing line of pale light that moved in time with her heartbeat. Calanor named her. He had been firm about it. He had thought about it for many weeks, he announced, and the name was not negotiable. He named her Hope. It was a common name. It was a common blood name. Vial, holding the small swaddled body of his daughter against his chest, with the same impossibly gentle warrior's hands he had once held his dying son, had laughed quietly and said, yes, of course. What else would she be called? Maris, in her bed, watching them, had said nothing. She had only laid her hand, very lightly, over the place between her own collarbones where the gift had once been a small frightened bird and was now a thing with very large wings, and had felt it answer, soft and steady, to the same place under the throat of the daughter in her father's arms. The thread had found, she understood, a third end. Outside the window, the orchards of Corvath Keep were going gold with autumn. The apple trees were heavy. The first cold wind of the year was moving through the leaves. Somewhere down in the lower courtyard, a child laughed. A small, clear, amber-eyed laugh. And Calanor's voice called something Maris could not quite hear. And Vale, beside the bed, lifted his head and smiled the smile that was no longer a king's smile, and no longer a wolf's smile, and no longer even a man's smile. It was, by then, a husband's. He bent and kissed his wife on the forehead, and his daughter on the crown of her small dark head, and he straightened, and he carried the baby to the window so that she might see, for the first time, the keep that was hers, and the orchards that were hers, and the realm that, in her own slow time, would also be hers. Maris watched them in the autumn light. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say. The bird in her chest, the one she had carried for 7 silent years and almost let die in a long stone room at dawn, was singing. It was singing because it was home. It was singing because, after a long, long flight, it had finally laid itself down in the only nest it had ever had 2 ends, and it would not, in this life or any life that followed it, fly out again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.